Todos los asistentes están en modo de solo escucha.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our sixth webinar in the series of requirements engineering, in this case about requirements management and specifically about traceability or relationships. My name is Jose Muñoz, and I am currently working as a consultant in Visure Requirements. In the past years, I have been gathering some experience in different projects as a system analyst, system engineer, business analyst, and also conducting some trainings about the requirement. In the following webinar, I will be sharing this experience and good practices with all of you when working with requirements. Today, as the sixth webinar in the series, we will be recapping some of the concepts already learned in the first 5 webinars about the requirements engineering and the different activities, a bit about requirements management also. After that, we will be moving forward to the main topic on today's webinar, which is going to be the relationships or the traceability in the section of the requirements management. Before starting, please allow me to explain a bit about the GoToWebinar interface. As you can see in the GoToWebinar panel, all of you are currently mute in order to avoid noises in the line. If there is any question that you may have during the webinar, please feel free to use the question tab. You can see that in the GoToWebinar panel in order to post that question. I will be able, or we will be answering all those questions at the end of the webinar. We will have some time for questions and answers. Additionally, we will be recording this webinar and we will be uploading it afterward to the different media, YouTube, Vimeo, and so on and so on. Well, with all that being said, let's start with the webinar. Just a small clarification before starting. You can see here in this slide's title that it states requirements engineering series, and probably you have seen somewhere else requirements management series. Well, just allow me to explain these two titles. Requirements management is, as we define in the past webinar, is a set of activities that are going to support the requirement engineering process. Okay, so from a point of view, the requirements engineering it's a more global concept. It included more activities and more things to do that just management the requirement, which is usually for having a change control management version of the requirements, managing attributes of the requirement, managing traces of the requirements. But the requirement engineering is a more formal and a more extended process. So that's why, in fact, these webinars are about requirements engineering, not just management. We may have used the title management because it's probably more sexy, more popular in general to talk about requirement management. Okay, so that's why we have those two titles. Anyway, today's webinar is going to be focusing on requirements management itself, and specifically about traceability, about relationships. So with that being said, and with that clear now, let's start with today's agenda, with our webinar agenda. As usual, I will be starting with a really fast introduction about Visure Solution, our company, just one slide in order to just localize a bit about our company. And after that, we will be recapping, we will be just summarizing what we have learned already in the first 5 webinar on 5 webinar of this series. We'll be just remembering some of the most important concept. After that, we will be ready to just jump to the main topic of today's webinar, which is going to be the traces or the traceability, the relationships, the links in the requirements management. Okay, how we are going to establish those links, what's the meaning of those links, how we can manage them, work with them, and so on and so on. Additionally, in this section, we will be reviewing how we can use a professional requirements engineering or requirements management tool like Visure Requirements in order to work with those traces, how we can use one of these tools in order to just give us more information, to get more information out of those traces. Finally, as I mentioned before, we will have some time for question and answer and also for summarizing the webinar. Okay. Remember that you can use at any moment, at any given point, the GoToWebinar interface in order to post a question. You don't have to wait until the end to post your question. I will be answering them at the end of the webinar, but you can post them at any moment. Okay. So let's start with the webinar. Let's start with the first point of the webinar, which is going to be an introduction, a really fast introduction about Visure Solution, our company. Well, Visure Solution is it's a company specializing in the requirements engineering for both system engineering and software engineering companies. As you may know, requirements are everywhere, not just when building a software or when building a system. I don't know, a tool, a plane, a microchip, wherever. All of those things will have requirements. So we work for both worlds, the system engineering world and the software engineering world. And we pick the best practices of both and we put them together in our tool in Visure Requirement. As you can read here, also we are the manufacturer and distributor of this tool of Visure Requirement, which is our leading requirement solution. Not just we offer a tool and all the infrastructure that is needed in order to work with the tool, courses, training, consultancy, but we also offer training and courses regarding requirements themselves, okay, independent of the tool. We are ISO SPI certified and we are also IREP certified, and we also offer training for you to certify in IREP. And finally, our headquarters are located in San Francisco in the United States, but we also have got offices in the UK, in Spain, and in Germany. As I promised, a really fast introduction about the company, and now we are ready to start with the webinar content. But before going directly to our today's main topic, which is going to be the traceability or the relationships between requirements and other artifacts, I want to just recap some of the concepts that we have seen already in the previous webinar. I strongly recommend that if you haven't yet, you can access to the previous webinars in the series, to the previous chapters, except for chapter 5. We have got a problem with that one and we will need to record that again, but eventually we will be uploading that chapter again. So I just suggest that you you access to our YouTube channel or to our different channels in other media like Vimeo, so you can just access to previous webinars. Anyway, I will be trying to just summarize what we have learned already on this series. As this is the 6th webinar in the series, I just realized when setting up all the material that I have more and more slides regarding on previous webinars. So I have just tried to put all the information in just a couple of slides. So that's why I just strongly recommend reviewing the previous videos, because I cannot summarize all the previous webinar in just a couple of slides, so please feel free to just access to those webinars. Anyway, I will try to just remember the main concepts. First of all, we started by defining the requirements engineering process, which are their main activities. And this is an important word, activities, because we don't mention the word stages, because it's not so easy as just we start with the first stage, and once we have finished, we move to the second one, and we just forget about the first one. We say activities because the different activities in the requirements engineering, we are going to be mixing them together. We will be performing the first one, then the second, then again the first, then the third, and there is no specific order. Okay, and we will be always moving backward and forward. There is no waterfall model for this. It's more like a spiral. Okay, and the four main activities are the elicitation, the analysis, the documentation or specification, and the validation. Okay, just to remember all of them, the requirement elicitation, it's related with discovering the requirement of the right system to build. Okay, so this is the part of the process in which we are going to ask different stakeholders, we are going to research, we are going to look for different information. Basically, we are going to look for all the requirements that we need to include into the specification of the new system or the maintenance that we are going to do. Okay, so during this step, we are going to apply different techniques in order to gather those requirements. We are going to conduct interviews, questionnaires. We may have some brainstorm sessions. We are going to develop some prototypes, and so on and so on. The idea is that at the end of this activity, we get a good set of requirements that we are ready to work with. As I mentioned before, remember, this is not on a stage. We are not going to gather all the requirements and then say, okay, we have all of them and now we are ready to move forward, because we will never have got, we will never will be able to say we have got all of them, because we will be discovering when we move forward that we have forgot something, or that someone have forgot to tell us something that is needed into the system. So that's why it's not as a stage, but an activity. Okay. So that's going to be the elicitation. Then we have got the analysis. The analysis is basically about understanding and negotiating those requirements. Okay, we will be doing that from the very same moment that we are gathering the requirement. We are going to be analyzing them with the stakeholder, with the user that we are just asking for the requirements. He's going to tell us, okay, this is the way we want to do this, or this is the way we are doing this, and we want the system to automatize it or whatever. And we will be just having some feedback. Okay, so this is what you want, this is what, and that it's starting with the analysis step. We will be trying to create some models, probably modeling is a great technique in this step, in order to just take all those requirements and try to get more of them to understand them better. The requirement, the next activity is going to be the requirement specification. Okay, so this is basically we are gathering requirements, we are understanding those requirements and negotiating those requirements with the users, with the stakeholders. At a given point, we need to start writing down formally those requirements now that we have properly understood them. Okay, so we have talked about different ways of specifying those requirements. Okay, and finally, we have talked also about the validation of the requirements, which is basically ensuring that we are building the right system. Not just that the system is working fine, that the system is right, but is the right system, the one that we are building. Okay, the system that the user or the stakeholders need. So those are the four main activities of the requirements engineering process. We have been reviewing then, as I mentioned before. If you want to get more information about one of these these activities, please feel free to check the old videos, okay, that you can check in our YouTube channel. Once we have analyze, or we have just go through those activities, we started in the fifth webinar talking about the requirements management. There are several definitions for requirements management, but from our point of view, the requirements management is going to include those set of activities or tasks that we are going to do in order to support the four main activities of the requirements engineering process. That is going to include, among others, tracing the requirements, assigning attributes to those requirements, prioritizing those requirements, controlling the changes on the requirements, and so on and so on. Okay, so we have talked mainly about three tasks, which are assign attributes to the requirements, and that was in fact the content of the fifth webinar in the series. We have talked about managing changes on those requirements, which is going to be probably the next webinar in the series, the seventh webinar. And we have talked about tracing those requirements, or we are going to talk about tracing those requirements on today's webinar. Regarding the attributes in the requirement, which was the content of the fifth webinar, for summarizing that, we just said that the attributes represent information that is inherent to the requirement, and it must be gathered and updated. It's really important to keep the attributes updated. The information we are displaying in the attribute must be updated. We have to keep the balance with the attributes between the number of attributes and the effort that we will be willing to invest in order to keep those attributes updated. Okay, so it's great to have thousands of attributes, well, more or less, but if we have that number of attributes, someone must be updating them continuously, so that's not probably the best way for working with the elements. Okay, we have to assign responsible to each attributes. We also talk about the prioritization process that is related with the attributes, how we can prioritize different requirements, and we talk about the different ways for controlling a way for controlling those attributes different states, which is the workflows. Okay, so we have covered all that information in previous webinar, and now today we are going to talk about traceability, about requirements relationships. So first of all, how we can define requirements traceability. Okay, I got in this page a couple of formal definitions from Gotel and Finkstein, from the IEEE, and another couple of sources. And according to the first definition, the requirements traceability refers to the ability to describe and follow the life of a requirement in both forward and backward directions. Okay, basically by means of these traces of this relationship, we will be able to just given a requirement, say, okay, so how we are going to implement this requirement, how this requirement is going to be included into the system, and following the traces forward, we will be able to see that. But also, if that requirement is properly traced, we should be able to distinguish, okay, so what's the rationale of this requirement? Who asked for this requirement? When this requirement was included in the system? Why is the motivation for this requirement? And just going backward, following the relationship backward, we will be able to go to the source of the requirement. That can be a stakeholder, or maybe a higher level requirement, or wherever. Okay. Another definition regarding requirements traceability is the one that is coming for the IEEE. A software requirement specification is traceable if the origin of each requirement is clear, and it facilitates the referencing of each requirement in future development or enhancement documentation. Okay, so once again, there is no mention to forward and backward traceability, but it's saying that because sorry, because tracing back to the origin is backward traceability, and just in the future is forward traceability. A measure in which a relationship can be established between two or more products, artifacts of the development process. That's another definition for requirements traceability. So as long as a requirement, a relationship can be established between two or more products, we can say that this specification is traceable. Okay, we are using here the word products and artifacts instead of requirements because the traces or the traceability, the relationships are not limited to just requirements. Okay, we will be tracing requirement with other requirements, but also requirements with other artifacts, with tests, with bugs, with change requests, with design elements, even with code if we are coding or things like that. Okay, so everything must be traced with the requirement. A trace, by the way, which is an important thing to define, is a reference between two elements. Okay, so with all this definition, with all these concepts in mind, let's go a bit deeper in the traceability. A requirement cannot be managed effectively with requirements traceability. Okay, it's really important. Traceability is one of the most important tasks when working with requirements. The requirements, we have established that in previous webinars, are a key artifact in the product or project life cycle. Okay, if not the most important part, but those requirements must be traced. Okay, because it's really important to have got the requirement, but if there is no traceability, if there is no way to see the origin of the requirement or how the requirement is going to be implemented, they are not complete. They are not doing all that they can do. We are not getting to the full potential of those requirements, of that information. Okay, so let's take that into account. We can say that the requirement is traceable or has been properly traced if you can discover who suggested the requirement, why the requirement exists, the rationale of the requirement, what requirements and other artifacts, again, not just requirement, are related to it, and how that requirements relate to other information, such as system design, implementations, and user documentation. Okay, so basically a requirement is traceable or has been properly traced, and it's going to be more complete if all those things can be discovered, can be easily discovered, easily analyzed by just watching the requirement. So the important thing is that we have to trace the requirements with everything. We have to trace the high-level requirement with the low-level requirement. We have talked about user and system requirements, so we must keep them traced together. If we have several levels of requirements, we have got business requirement, user, system, subsystem, component requirements, and so on and so on. All of those levels must be traced properly. We have to trace the requirement with their source, the stakeholder that asked this requirement, the standard that is forcing us or making us implementing this requirement. We have to trace the requirement with test. We need to know exactly how we are going to test this requirement at the end of the life cycle in order to know if the system has been properly developed. Okay, so in order for doing that, we need to trace the requirement with a test. We need to trace the requirement with defects and bugs, with change requests in order to just perform a change process. We will be talking about that in a future webinar in this series. And even with the code, if we are coding in our project, okay, that's more tricky to do, but it's also something that is recommended specifically for embedded system and things like that. So we're talking about traceability a lot. What are the benefits? What I'm getting by tracing all those requirements? Okay, well, several things. This is just an incomplete list of benefits for creating traces, but what we can get for keeping the traces of the requirement, well, first of all, impact analysis. Okay, by by tracing the requirement, I can just easily see that if I modify this requirement in here because the user is asking for this other thing now, or it is changing one of his initial request. Okay, so by changing this requirement, if I have it traced properly, I can easily see, okay, I have to change this, so I have to change maybe this user requirement or this request. That is going to trigger some change, or may trigger some change in these other system requirements that are related with that one. Those changes may trigger changes in the test related with those requirements, or maybe I don't have to change anything, but I have to just run the test again. Maybe that is going to also change the design of the system that we are designing, developing, or things like that. The impact analysis, it's going to be much more easier to do if we have got everything traced. Okay, if we don't have traces, the impact analysis is just hoping that the person that specified the system is still working with us and just try to just guess. Okay, we need the traces to perform the impact analysis and a change control also. Another benefit is going to be an improved software quality, because making changes correctly and completely is going to be more easy. I will be changing the specification, and I will be more easily I will be able to more easily discover exactly what I have to modify. We are going to also reduce the risk, because if a team with the key knowledge leaves, for example, a member of the team, sorry, with the key knowledge leaves the team, I will be able to just use the traceability and the specification in order to just try to discover everything that I need, even if the person that originally specify everything is not with us. Okay, it all is going to help me also to solve conflicts, for example. Yeah, because we can easily, thanks to the traceability, see exactly who asked for this requirement. Maybe this requirement is not compatible with this other one, so I can just go to the origin of each one of them and just ask to the corresponding people, okay, you have asked for this other stakeholder has asked for this, so now you have to talk, we have to negotiate exactly what we are going to do, because those two things are not compatible, for example. It's going to support the verification process, certification, localization of defects. Yeah, because having traces with tests, it will be more easy to just accept the system if the tests are related with the proper requirement, and just create the defects out of the requirement, out of the test, when we just run the test and we got some fails, things like that. So there is a lot of benefits that we are going to get for tracing. So we have to trace everything. The requirements must be traced with everything. They are going to govern the process, the whole process. So we must keep them traced in order to keep them alive. So requirement seems to be really important. So if it's so important, what are the difficulties, or why not everyone is just keeping the requirement trace? Well, there are some difficulties when tracing the requirement. Okay, the first and the main difficulty when working with the requirement is going to be the cost. Okay, keeping your specification trace, keeping the requirement trace is really costly. Okay, why? Different things. There is a little automated support for this. There are some tools that are going to help you by analyzing semantically the specification, analyzing the requirements. They can tell you these requirements seem to be related with this other one, things like that. But at the end, it's going to be you or the corresponding analyst, the one that is going to keep the requirement traced. They must be traced manually. You have to say, okay, this requirement is related with this one, and this requirement is implementing this other one. We are going to test this requirement with this set of tests. I have to establish those traces manually. Okay, so at the end, this is a problem because it's require a lot of time and it's require a lot of money. It's recommended to use a specialized tool like, for example, Visure Requirements. I will be explaining that afterward. But yes, if you have got Excel or Microsoft Word, you can keep traces of your requirement, of course, by using hyperlinks, by using traceability matrices in Excel, things like that. And that's a great start for tracing elements. But as soon as your project it's a bit more complicated, that a set of requirement, keeping the traces of all those elements is going to be a nightmare because Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel are not intended for a traceability tool. So we must use a tool, a professional tool, in order to keep the requirements traced. Okay. Basically, full traceability is very expensive and time-consuming. There is 3 graphs in here in this page. Sorry, because I got them from this page that you can see there, and they are in Spanish because it's in a Spanish page, but I can just translate that for you. Basically, it's a relationship cost benefit. Okay, the red line in the graph is representing the costs of keeping the requirements trace. The green line is representing the benefits, and the blue line is the relation, the ratio between cost and benefits. Okay, so basically what it's saying here is that from 0 to whole traceability, what I get in return for expending much or more or less time tracing. In a regular project, there is a moment in which I should stop tracing. I should stop keeping everything traced, because it's going to take a lot of money, a lot of time to keep everything traced. But in comparison with the return of benefits that I'm going to get. Okay. Especially interesting the 2 graphs in the right part of the screen. The first one in the top is just saying if the project is stable, it's a more or less a stable project that is not going to change with the time a lot, then we probably will need low traceability. We don't need to keep everything so much traced, because as the project is not going to be changing a lot, we are not going to get so much of the traces. Okay, which is specifically when we get more of those traces is when the project is changing a lot. In fact, in the bottom part of the screen, we can see a complex project graph, and there it's going to be more expensive to keep the traces, but we are going to get more benefit for keeping those traces, because the project is going to be changing a lot and a lot. So by those changes, if I have got the proper trace created and maintained, I can be performing the impact analysis of any change. I can just analyze very quickly what I must change and things like that. Okay, so basically the most complex, the most challenging is the project, the most traces I should be keeping. Mm-hmm. Other difficulties when tracing, well, the delayed gratification, we can say. Basically, the people that is creating the traces from the beginning of the project are probably not the people that are going to take benefit from that. That's not always the case. That depends on how big is the project, is the process, but we have to take that into account, that maybe you are doing something that is not for you, it's for a future stage, but that's the way it is. We have to do it anyway. And also much of the benefits for keeping those traces, we are not getting them at the beginning of the project, but at the end, when testing, when performing some maintenance, when modifying the system once the system is in production, or things like that. Okay, so maybe we are not getting the benefits directly when we start creating the traces, but eventually we will get them. Okay. And also another difficulty is the size and diversity of the trace. when we have got a huge project with thousands of requirements, with thousands of other artifacts like test use cases, design elements, maybe even code, okay, it's going to be really difficult to keep everything traced, and each user, each stakeholder is going to need a different information, different traceability information, so it's going to be difficult to have all of that. Okay, for that, we always recommend to have a set of traceability policies, exactly how we are going to trace the elements, which is going to be traced with which, and things like that. That's super important. Okay. So traceability properties. Let's talk now about when we are creating a trace between two requirements or between our requirements and other artifacts, what we should include in that trace. Okay, well, we have defined here 4 main properties, but it could be more. First of all is the rationale. We can say the motive, the reason for those relationships. So for example, this test is validating this requirement, or this requirement is specifying, this low-level requirement is specifying this high-level requirement, or this design element is implementing those requirements, things like that. Okay, so it's important to have a reason for the trace. Okay, that someone can read and understand the meaning of that trace. It's not the same if the requirement is constraining another requirement, or if the requirement is specifying or satisfying another requirement. Okay. The direction of the trace is another important property. It's not the same if a high-level requirement is traced with a low-level one, or the other way around. One can mean that the low-level one is implementing, is specifying the high-level one, and maybe the high-level one is motivating the low-level one, things like that. It's important to understand the direction of the traces. Okay. The cardinality, exactly, where this one requirement is related with one requirement, this one requirement is related with several requirements, or these several set of requirements are related with this other set of requirements. There are other methodologies, other tools that allow you to also define properties or attributes associated to the relationships. Okay, I'm not going to enter here more in detail because it's a bit complex, a bit difficult to do things like that, but there are times when it's helpful to have attributes related not just with the elements themselves, but also with the relationships. Okay, so those are going to be some properties related with the traceability. So how we should be tracing, or what are the different ways for tracing the different requirements with the different elements? Well, I have gathered here three techniques for tracing. We can see that they are more or less tool independent. Okay, the first way for tracing elements is free text. Okay, we have got a set of requirements, and at the end of each requirement, we can just add a section saying related to, and just add a set of names or set of codes of other requirements that are related with this one. This is the reason for us to set some webinars ago that for traceability, it's important to have a unique identifier associated with each requirement. By means of this unique identifier, we can just say that this requirement is related with this requirement called UR23 or something like that. Okay, so having a code or a unique ID, it's help us to creating the traces. Okay, so with the free text, we can do that. Even hyperlinks can be used if we are working a Word document. We can create hyperlinks to other requirements. Anyway, it's difficult to capture different type of links by using this technique. It's difficult to keep the link updated. Every time we create or modify a requirement, we have to remember to update the link, to update the traces, because they are not going to be updated by themselves. Okay. We can also create traceability tables in which we just create a table like this one in here with the code of each requirement, and then the rationale of the traces and the requirements that are, or the other artifacts that are related with this one. So for example, the requirements 1 depends on requirement 3 and 4. The requirement 2 depends with requirement 5 and 6, for example. This could be a way for doing that. It's not very robust against change, but could be a mechanism. Or also the traceability matrices, which are probably more helpful if you are working in Microsoft Excel. Okay, basically we just create a matrix of the different elements we have got in the project in columns and rows, and then we add any kind of symbol in order to describe that those two elements are traced together. So we can see here that the requirements 4 is traced with the requirement 2, requirement 2 is traced with 5 and 6, things like that. Okay. They are difficult to be used anyway when 100 or 1,000 of elements are involved in the project. So we have to remember that. So it's possible to trace without having a professional tool, but it's not so easy as tracing with a professional one. And in order to illustrate this, allow me to just very quickly, just 5 to 10 minutes, and then we can move forward to the conclusion and to the questions. Let's see how we can keep the traces in Visure Requirement. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is just switch to the virtual machine and just show you right now my tutorial project into Visure Requirement. If you remember for the previous webinar, this is the login screen. I'm going to use an admin user that is going to allow me to have rights over all the elements. And I'm going to start working with this tutorial project. In this project that I'm going to show you, we have got a set of requirements and other artifacts that we are going to be tracing together, and we're going to get some information out of those traces. Okay. Before anything else, let's just move to the diagram or to the meta model of the project. Okay. As you can see here, this is going to basically illustrate the different set of elements that I have got in my project and the traces between them. So, for example, here I have got user requirements that can be divided into 4 subtypes: customer requirements, marketing requirements, standards, and business rules. Those user requirements can be traced, can be satisfied by, and this is a trace definition, by system requirements. Basically, it's just this typical classification of requirements in 2 different levels: high-level requirement, user requirements, and system requirement, which are going to represent the low-level requirements. Okay, those low levels are also categorized in functional and non-functional. So we have defined in this diagram that my user requirements can be traced, can be satisfied by my system requirements. So we have defined that it is possible to create a trace between user and system requirements. As we are using a traceability tool into Visure Requirement, we can restrict the traces by this diagram. So we can define traceability policies. Based on this diagram, only user requirements can be traced with system requirements, only by the motive satisfied by, and only in this direction, from user to system. Additionally, in this project, I have got some system tests that are related with the system requirements. So they are validating those system requirements. Once again, this trace is restricted to the one representing the diagram, so the system test can be traced only with the system requirement, only by this motive and by this direction. Okay, this is just a really simple and a small example, just 2 levels of requirement: user and system requirement, and then system test. But using these, we can just define my traceability policies and the meta model of my project. If now I go back to my specification, I can see here I have got the user requirements, the system requirements, and the system test. Okay, basically the 3 type of elements that we have defined. This is a Microsoft Word-like view, but I have defined another view which is going to be important for traceability, which is a traceability view. By means of this view that I will be showing in just a few seconds, I have created a traceability tree of my project. As you can see here in this image, I can see in the first level of the tree all the user requirements, and under each user requirement I can see the system requirements, if any. Okay, so I can see really easy, really fast how my requirements are being traced in this project. I can see, in fact, if one of my user requirements is not yet satisfied by a system requirement easily. I can even just check in here the number of elements related with this one and just quickly see which are those elements. Okay, so we can use this traceability tree. Again, in this case, it's very simple because I have got just user requirement and system requirements in this view. But if I have got several level of requirements, I can just display all those level of requirements in this view. So just create a complete traceability tree. Not only I can create a traceability tree, but as you can see here, we mentioned that in the previous webinar. For example, for the system requirement, which are the second level, the low level requirement, we have got an status attribute. Okay, and based on that status attribute, we have created this column called complete. Okay, this column is telling us the status of the requirement in a graphical fashion. Okay, so if the requirement is approved, it's going to be 100% completed. If the requirement is ready for review, it's 3300%, 33%, sorry, things like that. So basically, we are just translating automatically the status into a percentage. For the user requirements, they don't have a status because we have defined that the status only applies to the low-level requirement. So what we are doing here is using the traceability information to calculate the status of the high-level requirement, in this case, the user requirement, calculate that status based on the status of the low-level requirements. So for example, if this one here, this user requirement is related with only one system requirement and it's ready for review, both are 33% complete. If I just move forward to the reviewed status, the high level requirement is going to be automatically also updated. In this case, it doesn't make more sense because there is only one requirement associated. But if I have got several requirements, by just advancing them to a further stage, I will automatically advance the high level one also. Okay, so this is what we can get by using a professional tool. We can just use the traceability information to update the high level requirement based on the modification of the low level one. And also the other way around. This is just a silly example of what we can get, but I just want to show you how we can explode the traceability information. Okay, we can display that trace information in several ways, just as you can see here, just by putting the cursor in the corresponding column, or we can just display a traceability panel in the right part of the screen that is just displaying automatically the linked elements. Okay, I have got the complete traceability, but I can just display the traceability of each single requirement. Okay, additionally, I can display by using the tool the traceability information in a more graphical way. Okay, I can just go back to the diagram and say, okay, I want to create a matrix between the system requirement and the system test. Okay, so I can just navigate to the validated by relationship and create a traceability matrix between the system requirement and the system test. I'm going to now automatically populate this matrix with system requirements in rows and test in columns, and I can easily just display the traceability information between those two elements. Okay, take into account that as I am using a virtual machine for running the tool, it takes longer than it really need, but just you can download an evaluation version of Visure Requirement and see that the performance is pretty good. This is not the one that we are watching right now, as I am using a virtual machine. So as you can see here, it's still loading, but we can just highlight some of the information. We can see exactly from here which system requirements are related with which system test. We can even apply some filter. So for example, show me those system requirements that are not linked with any test. So basically those system requirements that I am not testing yet. Okay. And this is really important. I mentioned before that one of the drawback, one of the defects, let's say, of a traceability matrix is that if I have got 100 or 1,000 of elements, it's going to be a problem to work with all of them. Well, in this case, as I can apply filter to rows and columns, I can just say, okay, show me only those that are not linked, the one that I'm watching right now, only those that have been created between those dates, only those included in this release, in this version, whatever. Okay. And additionally, I can see here in the matrix, as you have seen, but not only in the matrix, also in the different views, I can display some traces, as you can see, with red arrows and some of them with blue arrows. Okay. The meaning of the red arrow is that the trace is a suspect trace. What's the meaning of that? Well, basically, once I have established the traceability and I am happy with that, I can activate the suspect traces. And once the suspect traces are active, every time I modify an element, the tool is going to automatically trigger a suspect on the related elements. Basically, the tool is telling me, okay, you have changed a user requirement, but now you have to review that the system requirements related with them are not affected or impacted by the change. So it's basically a mechanism for performing an impact analysis. I can do that after performing the change, or even I can simulate the change by just modifying the element, perform the corresponding analysis, and afterward I can proceed with the change or just go back to a previous version of the elements without changing anything after performing the impact analysis, the cost that is going to have for performing the change. Okay. Finally, I would like also to show you, we are running out of time, so I will be just finishing. I would like also to show you that we can create a trace in several ways. Just upon element creation, when I create a new element, I can create the element automatically out of an existing one. I can just create the elements afterward, trace them, sorry, by just using the element properties or whatever, or I can even establish traceability by creating a view that is going to contain two types of elements, and just by drag and drop elements from one to another. Okay, so by doing so, I can, for example, like in this example, I'm going to create a view containing, as you can see here, the user requirements in here, the system requirements in here, and I can just say, okay, I'm going to trace this user requirement with this system requirement. I can just easily drag and drop the requirements and create the new link between them. Okay, there is more things to see in Visure Requirements about traces, but we are running out of time and I don't want to just overextend more than that. So remember that you can access to our webpage, www.visuresolution.com, in order to request an evaluation of Visure Requirement and just review all the traceability mechanism included into the tool. So just for summarizing, just for finishing with today's webinar, we have been talking about traceability in the requirements. We mentioned a month ago that the requirement management included, among other tasks, assigning attribute, prioritizing, controlling changes on requirements, and tracing. And we have focused today on tracing. The requirements are going to lead the whole life cycle of my product, of my system. So we have to keep them traced in order to do that lead in the proper way. Okay, we need to keep them traced with everything. who asked for this requirement, when it was asked, how it's going to be implemented, in which version, what's the impact if we change it, how it's going to be tested. For all of that, we need to keep them trace, and those traces must be updated every time we modify something, and we have to analyze them in order to see if there is any kind of impact. Okay. As usually, we recommend for any management activity to use a tool. As we said, when working with the attributes, it's helpful to have a tool, but now in the traceability, it's super helpful to have a tool, because keeping the traces together, keeping the traces updated in Word or in Excel is a real nightmare. It can be more or less done if it's not a huge project, but the time you are going to expend in order to keep that trace updated is going to be huge in comparison with having a tool that is going to take care of that. Okay, so this was today's webinar regarding requirements traceability. We are going to move forward to the question and answer section now. But before that, I was just want to thank you all of you for your attention. I am going to stop recording the webinar so we are able to upload it to the corresponding media channel. So if you are hearing this from YouTube or the channel, thank you for your attention and have a good day.